The sea roared like it knew my secrets, and I stood on the deck, gripping the railing as if it could anchor my unraveling heart. 7 days into this transatlantic cruise, I was drowning not in the ocean, but in the weight of who I was and who I could never be. By nightfall, I'd be sitting at the captain's table, pretending I belonged among the glittering elite, while hiding the truth that could sink me faster than any storm. My name is Ethan Caldwell, 32, a graphic designer from Chicago who'd scraped together every penny for this cruise. It was supposed to be my escapee, a chance to leave behind a life of half-truths and whispered judgments in a city that felt too small for my secrets. I'd grown up in a family where different was a dirty word, where love was a narrow path I'd never walked right. So here I was, on the serenity of the seas, chasing a horizon that promised freedom. The ship was a floating palace, all polished brass and chandeliers, carrying 3,000 passengers across the Atlantic from New York to London. I'd booked the cheapest cabin, a windowless box below deck, but it didn't matter. The ocean was my therapy, vast and indifferent, swallowing the noise of my past. I spent my days sketching the waves, the passengers, the crew, anyone who caught my eye. But one man caught more than that. Captain Daniel Hargrove, 45, was the kind of man who commanded a room without trying. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a jawline that could cut glass and graying hair that only made him more striking. He was the ship's untouchable king. His deep voice carried authority, his blue eyes a quiet storm. I'd seen him at the welcome ceremony, addressing the crowd with a confidence that made my chest tighten. He was everything I wasn't sure of himself, rooted in his place in the world. And yet, every time I passed him on deck, his gaze lingered just a second too long. That first week, I told myself it was nothing. A glance was just a glance. But then came the invitation, slipped under my cabin door in an embossed envelope. You are cordially invited to dine at the captain's table. Me, the nobody from Chicago, invited to sit with the ship's elite. I didn't know why I'd been chosen, maybe a random draw, maybe a mistake. But as I stood there, staring at the creamy cardstock, my pulse raced with something dangerous, possibility. The dining room was a spectacle, all crystal and candlelight, with a string quartet weaving melodies into the air. I wore my only blazer, feeling like an imposter among the sequined gowns and tailored tuxedos. The captain's table was at the center, a round mahogany masterpiece set for 8. I was the last to arrive, my palms sweaty as I took my seat across from Captain Hargrove. He looked up, and those blue eyes locked onto mine, steady and unreadable. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice like warm whiskey. "I'm glad you could join us." I nodded, my throat tight. The other guests, wealthy retirees, a tech mogul, a retired opera singer, chatted about their worldly adventures. But I barely heard them. Daniel's presence was a gravitational pull. He asked me about my sketches, his interest genuine, and I stumbled through answers, hyper-aware of every word. When he laughed at my nervous joke about drawing the ship's mascot, a tacky dolphin statue, the sound was a spark in my chest. Dinner stretched on, course after course: lobster bisque, filet mignon, a dessert I barely tasted. Daniel's attention kept finding me, a brush of his gaze, a question that felt too personal for the setting. By the time coffee was served, I was dizzy with something I couldn't name. Then, as the others drifted to the dance floor, he leaned across the table, his voice low. "Ethan, would you like to see the bridge? It's not often we invite guests, but I think you'd appreciate the view." My heart stopped. The bridge, his domain. I should have said no, very instinct screamed it. But the word that came out was yes. The ship's bridge was a marvel of technology, all glowing screens and polished controls. with floor-to-ceiling windows framing the endless black sea. The crew on duty nodded at Daniel, then melted away, leaving us alone. He stood by the helm, his silhouette sharp against the starlit ocean, and I felt the weight of the moment, like standing on the edge of a cliff. "You're not like the others," he said, turning to face me. "You see things. The way you sketch it's like you're capturing souls, not just faces." I laughed, nervous, deflecting. "I just draw what's in front of me." "No," he said, stepping closer. "You see what's underneath." The air between us crackled. I wanted to run, to hide, to confess everything I'd spent years burying. But before I could speak, he reached out, his hand brushing Minea touch so brief it could have been an accident. It wasn't. "Ethan," he said, his voice softer now. "What are you running from?" The question hit like a wave, stripping me bare. I didn't answer. I couldn't. But in that moment, with the sea stretching out before us and the world so far away, I knew this cruise was about to change everything. The bridge was silent except for the hum of the ship's engines, a low pulse that matched the thud of my heart. Daniel's question hung in the air. What was I running from? I wanted to spill it all, the suffocating expectations of my family, the years spent hiding my truth, the ache of loving in secret. But I stood frozen, his hand still lingering near mine, the ocean beyond the windows a mirror to the chaos inside me. "I don't know," I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I'm just looking for something." He studied me, his eyes searching, and for a moment, I thought he'd push harder. Instead, he nodded, stepping back to give me space. "The sea has a way of showing you what you're looking for," he said, "even if it scares you." I swallowed hard, grateful for the reprieve but unnerved by how easily he saw through me. He gestured toward the window, pointing out the stars reflected on the water, and began explaining the ship's navigation system. His voice was steady, professional, but there was a warmth beneath it, like he was sharing something personal. I nodded along, barely understanding, too distracted by the way his uniform hugged his shoulders, the way his hands moved with quiet confidence. The tour ended too soon, and he walked me back to the deck, the night air cool against my flushed skin. "Thank you for tonight," I said, awkward, as we paused by the railing. "Tomorrow," he said, not a question. "There's a crew-only deck on the upper level. Private. You'd like the view for your sketches. Meet me there at sunset." I should have said no. He was the captain, untouchable, and I was a passenger with a past I couldn't outrun. But his invitation felt like a lifeline, and I was too weak to let go. "I'll be there," I said. The next day dragged, each hour a battle between anticipation and dread. I spent the morning sketching in my cabin, trying to capture the curve of Daniel's jaw from memory, then tearing up the page in frustration. What was I doing? He was probably just being polite, a captain entertaining a guest. But that touch on the bridge, that question, it felt like more. By sunset, I was a wreck. My stomach knotted as I climbed to the crew deck. It was a small, secluded space, tucked away from the passenger areas, with a single bench and a view of the horizon that stole my breath. Daniel was already there, out of his captain's uniform, wearing a simple white shirt and jeans. He looked younger, less guarded, a man instead of a myth. "You came," he said, smiling, and my nerves dissolved into something warmer. We sat on the bench, the sky bleeding orange and pink, and talked, not about the ship or the sea, but about life. He told me about growing up in a small Maine fishing town, the son of a lighthouse keeper, always drawn to the water. I told him about Chicago, about my art, about the family I loved but could never be honest with. I didn't say the word gay, but it hung between us. Unspoken. Understood. You're brave, he said suddenly, his voice low. Coming here. Alone. Chasing something you don't even know how to name. I laughed. Bitter. Brave. I've been hiding my whole life. Hiding doesn't mean you're not brave, he said. It means you're surviving. His words cracked something open in me, and I looked away, afraid he'd see the tears prickling my eyes. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the deck grew darker, the space between us smaller. His knee brushed mine, and this time, neither of us pulled away. Ethan, he said, his voice rough. I need to tell you something. My heart pounded. I knew what was coming, or I thought I did. But before he could speak, a crew member appeared, breathless, calling for the captain. An issue in the engine room. Urgent. Daniel's face tightened. The moment shattered. Duty calls, he said. Standing. Tomorrow. Same time. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. As he left, I stayed on the deck, staring at the stars, wondering what he'd been about to say and whether I was ready to hear it. The next few days were a blur of stolen moments. A glance across the dining room, a brush of shoulders in a crowded hallway. A note slipped under my door, meet me at the stern. Midnight. Each encounter was a spark, building something I couldn't control. But with every moment, the weight of reality grew heavier. He was the captain, bound by rules I didn't fully understand. I was a passenger, temporary, leaving in a week. And then there was the truth I hadn't spoken aloud. Not to him, not to anyone on this ship. By the fifth night, I was falling hard. We met again on the crew deck, the air thick with tension. He told me about his years at sea, the loneliness of command, the way he'd learned to lock away parts of himself to fit the role. I told him about the boy I'd loved in college, the one who'd left when I couldn't come out, the guilt that still haunted me. We were two men circling a truth, too afraid to name it. Then, under a sky heavy with stars, he took my hand. Not a brush, not an accident, a deliberate, steady grip. Ethan, he said, his voice shaking. I've spent my life running from this. But with you, I don't want to run anymore. My breath caught. I wanted to say it back, to confess everything. But fear clamped down hard. Instead, I squeezed his hand, letting the silence speak for me. It was enough for now. His hand in mine felt like a promise. But promises at sea are fragile things. The stars above us were bright, but they couldn't drown out the fear clawing at my chest. Daniel Hargrove, the unshakable captain, had just admitted he was as scared as I was. And somehow, that made me want him more. We stood on the crew deck, the ship's gentle sway rocking us closer. His thumb traced slow circles on my hand, and I wondered how a touch so small could feel so seismic. I've never done this, he said, his voice barely above the waves. Not with a passenger. Not with anyone. Really. I wanted to ask what this meant, but I was afraid of the answer. Instead, I looked at him, his face half lit by moonlight, and said, me neither. It wasn't entirely true. I'd had flings. Brief and hidden, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt like it could break me open. He let go of my hand, and I felt the loss like a physical ache. We should be careful, he said, glancing toward the deck's entrance. The crew, they talk. And I'm supposed to be the captain. I finished, a bitter edge to my voice. Untouchable. He winced, and I regretted it instantly. It's not that simple, he said. This ship, this life fight's all I have. If I lose it, he didn't finish, but he didn't need to. I knew what he meant. The world wasn't kind to men like us. Not in his world of rigid hierarchies and polished reputations. I'd spent my life dodging judgment. But for Daniel, the stakes were higher. A captain's life was a performance. Every move watched. Every slip a potential disaster. "Let's walk," he said, and we moved to the stern, where the ship's wake churned white against the Black Sea. The night was warm, but I shivered, caught between wanting to run toward him and away from him. We talked. Safer topics, now his favorite ports. My art, but the undercurrent was there, pulling us back to the unspoken. The next day, I tried to distract myself. I joined a trivia game in the lounge, sketched passengers by the pool, even danced with a kind older woman who called me charming. But my mind was on Daniel, on the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, on the secret we were building in stolen moments. By evening, I was restless, my sketchbook filled with half-finished drawings of his face. Another note arrived: Captain's private dinner. Tonight, 8 p.m. My cabin. Come alone. My heart lurched. His cabin. The invitation was a line we couldn't uncross. And I knew it. I spent an hour agonizing, changing shirts 3 times, as if fabric could armor me against what was coming. His cabin was nothing like I'd expected. No sterile officer's quarters, but a warm, lived-in space with bookshelves, a small record player, and a window framing the sea. A table was set for 2, candlelight flickering over a spread of desserts, chocolate torte, fresh berries, a bottle of wine. Daniel stood by the window, still in his uniform, but his posture was softer, unguarded. "I thought we deserved something private," he said, gesturing to the table. "No crew, no passengers, just us." I sat, my hands shaking as I picked up a glass. The wine was rich, the dessert sweeter, but it was his presence that intoxicated me. We talked, laughed, the tension easing with every sip. Then, as the candles burned low, he reached across the table, his fingers grazing mine. "Ethan," he said, his voice raw, "I don't know what this is, but I know I don't want it to stop." I couldn't breathe. I wanted to tell him I felt the same, that I'd never felt so seen, so alive. But the words stuck, tangled in years of fear. Instead, I stood, closing the distance between us, and kissed him. It was tentative at first, a question. His lips were warm, hesitant, then hungry. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer, and the world fell away: the ship, the sea, the rules. There was only him, only us. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding. We broke apart, breathless, and he rested his forehead against mine. "We can't," he whispered, but his hands didn't let go. "If anyone finds out." "I know," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "But I don't care." He laughed, a broken sound, and kissed me again. The dessert was forgotten, the night stretching into something reckless and beautiful. We didn't sleep, didn't need to. We talked, touched, laughed, and for those hours, the world was ours. But dawn brought reality crashing back. A knock on the door, urgent. "Official." Daniel's face hardened as he answered. A crew member's voice muttering about a passenger complaint. A scheduling conflict. He handled it with his usual calm. But when the door closed, he looked at me, and I saw the fear in his eyes. "We have to be careful," he said again. And this time, I felt the weight of it. This wasn't just about us. It was about his career, his life, the ship that was his home. And Muhat was I risking, a heart I'd barely learned to trust. As I left his cabin, the ship felt different, like it was watching us. I knew we were playing with fire, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I'd finally found something worth burning for. The ship's corridors felt narrower as I slipped out of Daniel's cabin, the taste of his kiss still on my lips. Dawn painted the deck in soft pinks, but my chest was heavy with the weight of what we'd done. We'd crossed a line, and there was no going back, not from him. Not from the truth we'd let breathe in that candlelit room. I spent the day in a haze, avoiding the crowded decks and retreating to my cabin to sketch. My pencil traced the lines of Daniel's face, the curve of his smile, the intensity in his eyes. Each stroke felt like a confession, a way to hold on to him when the world was pulling us apart. But every creak of the ship, every murmur of passing crew, made me jump. Certain someone knew, certain we'd been seen. That evening, I found another note. Meet me at the bow. 11 p.m. We're something warm. My heart raced, torn between fear and longing. I told myself to stay away, to protect us both. But by 10:55, I was there, bundled in a sweater, the wind sharp against my face. The bow was deserted, the ship slicing through the dark sea, and Daniel was waiting, his silhouette stark against the night. "You're here," he said, relief softening his voice. He wore a dark jacket, no uniform, just a man standing in the cold, looking at me like I was the only thing that mattered. I couldn't stay away, I admitted, and he smiled, pulling me into a shadowed corner where the wind couldn't reach us. His arms were warm, his breath steady, and for a moment, we were safe. We talked, our voices low, about everything and nothing. He told me about his first command, a cargo ship where he'd learned to bury his desires to survive. I told him about my father, who'd called my art a phase and my silence a betrayal. The more we shared, the closer we grew, our hands finding each other, our bodies leaning in against the cold. But the ship never slept. Footsteps echoed nearby, and we froze, pulling apart as a crew member passed. Oblivious. Daniel's jaw tightened, and I saw the strain in his eyes, the constant vigilance, the fear of being caught. "This is harder than I thought," he said, his voice barely audible. "I want this, Ethan, but I don't know how to keep it." "Then we'll figure it out," I said, reckless, desperate. "We'll be careful. We'll make it work." He looked at me, doubt and hope warring in his expression, and nodded. "Tomorrow night," he said. "My cabin again. I'll make sure we're alone." The next day, the ship buzzed with rumors. A passenger had seen two men at the bow. Too close. Too late at night. No names. No details. But the whispers were enough to make my skin crawl. I avoided Daniel's gaze at breakfast, kept my distance during the day, but every moment apart felt like a betrayal. By night, I was back in his cabin, the door locked, the world shut out. We didn't talk about the rumors. Instead, we lost ourselves in each other's kisses that turned desperate, hands that mapped every inch of skin, promises whispered against the hum of the ship. But even in his arms, I felt the clock ticking. 3 days left until we docked in London. 3 days to figure out what this was, what it could be. The next morning, trouble found us. A crew member, a sharp-eyed woman named Clara, cornered me in the dining hall. "You're the artist, right?" she said, her tone too casual. "People are talking. Be careful who you spend your nights with." My stomach dropped. "I don't know what you mean," I said, but my voice shook. And she didn't push. She didn't need to. The warning was clear. I told Daniel that night, my words tumbling out in his cabin. He listened, his face grim, and pulled me close. "I'll handle it," he said. "Clara's loyal, but she's ambitious. She won't say anything unless she's sure." "But what if she is?" I asked. fear choking me. What if they find out? He didn't answer, just held me tighter. And I knew he was as scared as I was. We were two men caught in a world that didn't want us, on a ship that felt like a cage. But in that moment, in his arms, I didn't care. I'd fight for this for him no matter the cost. The ship's engines thrummed beneath us, but the real storm was in my chest. Daniel's arms were my only anchor, his breath warm against my neck as we lay in his cabin. The world locked out for another stolen night. But Clara's warning echoed, a reminder that our secret was fraying. And with only 2 days until London, time was running out. Morning came too fast. I slipped out before dawn. The corridors empty but heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. I spent the day sketching in a quiet corner of the library, trying to lose myself in lines and shadows. But every stroke was Daniel's eyes, his hands, the way he made me feel like I could finally be whole. By afternoon, the rumors had grown louder. A passenger mentioned the captain's friend at lunch, her tone dripping with curiosity. I forced a smile, my heart hammering, and excused myself. Daniel found me at sunset on the crew deck, his face drawn. Clara's been asking questions, he said, his voice low. She saw us at the bow. She doesn't have proof, but she's watching. What do we do? I asked, my voice cracking. I wanted to be brave, but fear was winning. I'd spent my life hiding. And now, when I'd finally found something real, it felt like it was slipping away. We keep our distance, he said, though his eyes said he hated it. Just until we dock. Then we'll figure it out. The words were practical, but they cut deep. Distance meant no more late-night talks. No more stolen touches. It meant going back to pretending, and I wasn't sure I could. But I nodded, because I saw the strain in his face, the weight of his responsibilities. He wasn't just a man. He was the captain, and this ship was his world. That night, I stayed in my cabin, staring at the ceiling, the ache in my chest unbearable. I wanted to run to him, to hell with the consequences. But I didn't. Instead, I sketched a single page, his face in profile, the sea behind him, a love letter in lines I'd never show. The next day was torture. I saw him once, addressing passengers about the upcoming port, his voice steady but his eyes avoiding mine. It was like losing him already, and the pain was sharper than I'd expected. I wandered the ship, restless, until I ended up at the stern, where we'd stood nights ago. The sea was calm, but I was anything but. That evening, another note arrived, my cabin. Midnight. We need to talk. My heart leapt, then sank. Talk. The word felt final, like an ending I wasn't ready for. But I went, because I couldn't not. His cabin was dark, the only light from a single lamp. He looked exhausted, his uniform rumpled, his eyes heavy with something I couldn't read. Ethan, he said, closing the door. This is bigger than us. I froze. What are you saying? I'm saying I could lose everything, he said, his voice breaking. My career, my reputation. If Clara talks, if the company finds out, I'm done. And you deserve better than sneaking around, hiding who you are. I don't care about sneaking, I said, stepping closer, desperate. I care about you. He looked at me, his eyes raw, and for a moment, I thought he'd kiss me. Instead, he turned away, gripping the edge of his desk. I've been hiding my whole life, he said. I thought I could do this, but I can't. Not without hurting you. The words hit like a punch. I wanted to argue, to beg, but my throat was too tight. Instead, I reached for him, my hand on his arm, pulling him back. Don't do this, I said. Don't push me away. He didn't move, but he didn't pull away either. We stood there, caught in the silence, until he finally turned, his hands cupping my face. The kiss was desperate, a collision of fear and need. And for a moment, I thought we'd survive this. But then the door rattled a sharp, urgent knock. We sprang apart, my heart in my throat. "Captain," a voice called. "Emergency on the bridge." Daniel cursed under his breath, his face a mask of control as he opened the door. A young officer stood there, oblivious to the tension. "Sir, we need you now." "I'm coming," Daniel said, then glanced at me, his eyes pleading. "Stay here. I'll be back." I nodded, but as the door closed, I felt the walls closing in. I sat on his couch, staring at the bookshelves, the records, the life he'd built, and I wondered if I was about to lose it all. I sat in Daniel's cabin, the lamp casting long shadows across the room, each one a reminder of how fragile this moment was. The ship rocked gently, but my world felt like it was splintering. He'd been gone an hour, maybe more, and every creak of the floorboards made me flinch, expecting Clara or someone worse to barge in. When the door finally opened, Daniel looked drained, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen. "False alarm," he said, locking the door behind him. "A sensor glitch, but it's handled." He sank onto the couch beside me, close but not touching, and the distance felt like a chasm. "Ethan," he started, his voice low, "we need to talk about what happens when we dock." The words were a knife. I'd been avoiding them, pretending we could stay in this bubble forever. "What do you want to happen?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked at me, his eyes heavy with conflict. "I want you," he said simply, "but I don't know how to make this work. My life is this ship. Yours is wherever you choose. Chicago, London, anywhere. You're free in a way I'll never be." "I'm not free," I said, sharper than I meant. "You think I can just go back to my life like nothing happened? Like you didn't happen?" He flinched, and I hated myself for it. But I was angry not at him, but at the world that made this so hard, at the fear that kept us hiding. I stood, pacing the small cabin, my hands shaking. "I've spent my life pretending to be someone I'm not," I said. "For my family, my friends, everyone. And then I met you. And for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. I can't go back to holding my breath. Daniel." He stood, closing the distance between us, his hands on my shoulders. "I don't want you to," he said. "But if we're caught, it's not just gossip. I could lose my command. You could be dragged into a scandal you don't deserve." "Then let's not get caught," I said, reckless, desperate. "We'll be careful. We'll figure it out." He laughed, a broken sound, and pulled me into his arms. "You make it sound so easy," he whispered, his lips brushing my forehead. "But I'm scared. Ethan, I've never let myself want this much." I kissed him, soft at first, then deeper, pouring everything I couldn't say into it. We sank back onto the couch, the world fading until it was just us. Just this. But even as we held each other, the clock was ticking. One day left until London. The next morning, the ship was alive with pre-docking excitement, passengers packing, crew bustling, announcements blaring about customs and disembarkation. I avoided Daniel, not because I wanted to, but because every glance felt like a risk. Clara was everywhere, her eyes sharp, her smile too knowing. At lunch, she sat at a nearby table, watching me, and I wondered how much she'd guessed. That afternoon, I found a note in my cabin, "Meet me at the bridge. 10 p.m. Last chance." My heart sank. Last chance. The words felt like a goodbye, and I wasn't ready. The bridge was quiet when I arrived. The crew dismissed. The ocean black beyond the windows. Daniel stood at the helm. His uniform crisp, but his face raw. Unguarded. Tomorrow, he said, not looking at me. We dock. You'll walk off this ship. And I'll stay. That's how it's supposed to be. Supposed to be. I stepped closer. My voice shaking. Is that what you want? He turned. His eyes blazing. What I want is you. But I don't know how to keep you without destroying us both. Then don't. I said, my voice breaking. Don't keep me. Let me choose. He stared at me. And for a moment, I thought he'd push me away again. Instead, he pulled me close. His kiss fierce. Like he was claiming something he'd never let go. We stood there. The ship carrying us toward an ending neither of us wanted. And I knew we had to decide fight for this. Or let it sink. The bridge was our last sanctuary. The hum of the ship a fragile shield against the world waiting to tear us apart. Daniel's kiss was a lifeline. But it couldn't drown out the truth. Tomorrow, we'd dock in London. And this whatever it was would face its reckoning. I clung to him. My hands fisted in his uniform. Afraid that letting go would mean losing him forever. We can't stay here, he said, pulling back. His voice rough. The crew will be back soon. I nodded. But neither of us moved. The weight of his words from earlier last chance hung heavy. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this was it. What happens tomorrow? I asked. My voice barely steady. When I walk off this ship, what happens to us? He looked away. His jaw tight. And I saw the captain in him again. The man who carried the weight of 3,000 souls. I don't know, he admitted. I've spent my life following rules. Ethan. Physio break every one of them. Then break them, I said. Reckless. Desperate. For once. Choose what you want. Not what you're supposed to do. His eyes met mine. Raw and searching. And for a moment, I thought he'd agree. But then he shook his head. A faint, sad smile on his lips. It's not just about me. If I'm outed, the company won't hesitate. They'll strip my command. Maybe worse. And you'd be dragged into it. Your name in some tabloid. Your life picked apart. I don't care about that, I said. But even as I spoke, I felt the lie. I cared. I'd spent years hiding from judgment. And the thought of facing it now, for something so new, so fragile, terrified me. He took my hand. His grip firm. I care, he said. I won't let you get hurt because of me. The words were a vow, but they felt like a goodbye. I wanted to argue, to fight, but the exhaustion in his face stopped me. We left the bridge, slipping through the ship's quiet corridors, and parted with a whispered promise to meet one last time before docking. The final day was chaos. Passengers swarmed the decks, luggage piled high, voices loud with excitement. I felt like a ghost, drifting through the crowd, my heart anchored to a man I couldn't have. Clara's eyes followed me at breakfast, her smile sharp enough to cut. I wondered what she knew, what she'd do with it. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I found Daniel on the crew deck, alone, staring at the sea. He looked older, the weight of his role etched into his face. I can't do this, I said, my voice breaking. I can't just walk away. He turned, his eyes soft but resolute. You have to, he said. Not because I don't want you, but because I do. You deserve a life where you don't have to hide. And you don't. I shot back, tears burning my eyes. You're going to stay here, locked in this cage, pretending you're fine. He didn't answer, just pulled me into his arms. his embrace fierce and fleeting. "I'll find you," he whispered. "When this cruise is over, when I'm off this ship, I'll find you." It was a promise, but it felt like a dream, one I wanted to believe but couldn't quite grasp. We stood there, the sea stretching out before us, until a crew member's voice called him away. I watched him go, my heart splintering, knowing this might be the last time. That night, I packed my bags, each item a reminder of the life I'd return to, a life without him. I sketched one final drawing, his face against the horizon, and tucked it into my journal. Maybe he'd keep his promise. Maybe I'd find the courage to live openly, the way he couldn't. But as the ship sailed toward London, all I felt was loss. The London skyline emerged like a promise I couldn't trust, gray and jagged against the dawn. The serenity of the seas docked with a final shudder, and I stood on the deck, my bags at my feet, watching passengers stream toward their futures. I wanted to find Daniel, to steal one last moment. But he was the captain, and the captain didn't belong to me. I hadn't seen him since the crew deck. His whispered vow, "I'll find you," echoing in my mind. I wanted to believe it, but the weight of reality was heavier than hope. He was bound to this ship, to a life of rules and secrets, and I was just a passenger, a fleeting disruption in his carefully ordered world. As I disembarked, the crowd swallowed me, their chatter a dull roar. I glanced back, searching for him, but the deck was empty. My heart sank, and I turned away, forcing myself to move forward. London was cold, unfamiliar, a city that didn't know my story. I checked into a small hotel, my sketchbook my only comfort, and tried to imagine a life without him. Days passed, then weeks. I took freelance jobs, sketching for local galleries, but every drawing carried his shadow. I checked my phone obsessively, hoping for a message, a sign, but there was nothing. The silence was worse than rejection. It was proof I'd been a fool to hope. Then, one rainy afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name in neat, familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, unfolding a single sheet of paper with a sketch tucked in his idea drawing of me, standing on the ship's bow, the sea behind me. It was his work, rough but unmistakable, capturing me the way I'd captured him. "Ethan," the letter read, "I'm sorry for the silence. I needed time to make this right. I've resigned my command. The ship was my home, but you were my freedom. I'm in London now, and I want to find you not as a captain, but as a man. If you'll have me. Daniel." My breath caught, tears blurring the words. He'd done it. He'd broken free, risked everything. For me. For us. I clutched the letter, my heart racing, and grabbed my coat. The sketch showed me at the bow, and I knew where to go, up here by the Thames, where ships docked and dreams began. I found him there, standing in the rain. No uniform, just a man in a worn jacket, his eyes searching the crowd. When he saw me, his face lit up, a smile that warmed me through the cold. I ran to him, the distance between us closing in seconds, and we collided, his arms strong and sure. "You're here," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I told you I'd find you," he said, his lips brushing mine. We stood there, rain soaking us, the world fading away. It wasn't perfect, there'd be challenges, judgments, a life to build from scratch. But in that moment, we were enough. Two men, no longer hiding, choosing love over fear. The sea had brought us together, and now, on solid ground, we'd write our own story, one of courage, of truth, of a love worth fighting for.